Picture this. It's the spring of 2026. You're stuck in absolutely gridlocked traffic on Sheikh Zayed Road. You've got the icy air conditioning blasting just to fight off that intense desert heat, but honestly, you're still breaking a sweat as you stare down at your phone. Why? Because the stock market screens are just flashing red. And over at the airport, there's a multi-million-dollar Bugatti sitting completely abandoned. There's a fine layer of desert dust settling on the windshield, and the keys are literally still in the ignition. It's an incredibly visceral, almost cinematic scene of pure panic. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating economic mysteries of our time, the true, bifurcated impact of the 2026 Gulf War on Dubai.
Right out of the gate, we're hit with this massive, almost impossible contradiction. On one hand, you've got analysts and commentators pointing to that abandoned Bugatti, pointing to the mass exodus of wealth, and flat out declaring Dubai is dead. But then, you look at the official reports from Dubai's Department of Economy and Tourism, and they are projecting a massive 4.5% GDP growth. So how in the world does a city experience an apocalyptic panic and an economic boom at the exact same time? To figure that out, we really need to unpack the mechanics of this crisis.
Okay, Part 1, the 2026 Global Shockwave. Let's look at what actually sparked this whole thing. We have to start with the geopolitical trigger. Escalating conflicts and strikes led Iran to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. Now, think of the strait as the main jugular vein for the entire global energy and logistics system. The moment it was squeezed shut, multinational airspace closures followed almost instantly, completely paralyzing the region's logistics network. The global reaction was violent. Brent crude oil didn't just climb, it absolutely skyrocketed past $120 a barrel in a matter of days. Qatar Energy even had to declare force majeure on its contracts, which is basically a legal act of God, get-out-of-jail-free card. And that completely choked off the region's liquefied natural gas exports. The closure of this global choke point caused what the International Energy Agency called the greatest global energy security challenge in history.
Looking at the fallout across different sectors on the ground, the panic was immediate. Tourism and aviation hit critical risk levels right away. Emirates flights were grounded, and the usually busy sky just went totally quiet. Finance was flashing red with a severe, high-risk liquidity crunch. This meant banks literally didn't have enough physical cash on hand, forcing the central bank to step in aggressively so retail investors wouldn't withdraw everything in a panic. Logistics, as you'd expect, faced severe medium-risk delays. It was a systemic shock that had investors absolutely scrambling for cover.
So that brings us to Part 2. Is Dubai actually dead?
For anyone watching the initial fallout, the signs of collapse were genuinely terrifying. The visual evidence of the expat exodus was just everywhere. In the first quarter alone, over 1,300 luxury cars were seized at the airport, just left behind by people taking one-way flights out. Down at the marinas, 42 massive super yachts, which is roughly 13% of the entire global fleet, were abandoned and literally left to rot. That wiped out 12,000 maritime jobs in just 3 months. And because the Gulf imports about 70% of its food through that blockaded strait, grocery prices skyrocketed anywhere from 40 to 120%.
And behind the scenes, the financial plumbing just totally froze up. Imagine your maritime insurance premium jumping from $80,000 to a massive £320,000 overnight. That single monumental shock paralyzed brokers, it completely stalled lenders, and it ultimately muted all those construction cranes across the city's glittering skyline. Projects simply ground to a halt.
Which naturally leads us into Part 3, the ghost of 2008. Everyone's asking the same question, right? Are we just watching the devastating 2008 real estate crash happen all over again? Well, the short answer is no, because the foundations today are entirely different. Back in 2008, Dubai was essentially an unregulated house of cards built by a transient workforce, where a developer could take your deposit with basically zero oversight. But look at 2026. The population has swelled to 4 million people, mostly long-term, family-centric residents. And crucially, capital is now protected by strictly regulated RERA escrow accounts. Think of these as locked digital vaults, protecting your deposit. If a developer delays a project today, your money isn't just, poof, gone.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Unlike the oil-dependent boom of the past, Dubai deliberately engineered its survival. Oil actually makes up less than 1% of its GDP now. As you can see, the economy is an incredibly diversified fortress built on trade, financial services, tourism, and tech. They built this diversification specifically to act as a shock absorber for this exact kind of massive geopolitical earthquake.
Part 4, the safe haven paradox.
So how on earth is global capital flowing into Dubai when there are missiles flying in the region and supply chains are snapping in half?
Despite the abandoned Bugattis and the grounded flights, the city officially projects a 4.5% GDP growth for 2026. This completely defied all expectations from international economists.
The secret here is that global capital views Dubai as a highly regulated safe haven. Look at this. We saw an absolutely massive 47 billion dirham spike in UAE bank deposits. That is capital fleeing turbulence in less stable Middle Eastern jurisdictions and seeking shelter in Dubai's vaults. The tech sector is projected to grow by 12%, with 340 new tech companies setting up shop in just the first quarter, relocating their headquarters far away from direct conflict zones. And even real estate still managed 32 billion dirhams in transactions.
But what about those blocked ports we talked about? Well, Dubai's massive long-term investments in infrastructure kicked in like a shield. DP World dynamically adapted by just rerouting cargo outside the choke point over to Oman. Meanwhile, Emirates Sky Cargo simply took the burden to the skies, bumping up air freight by 23%. They literally built redundancies into the system for a rainy day exactly like this.
All right, Part 5, Surviving the Desert Storm.
To really synthesize all of this, we're essentially looking at a tale of two cities existing in the exact same space. The Mirage is suffering. That's the old Dubai of highly speculative property flipping, transient labor, and vulnerable tourism routes. It took a devastating hit, but the fortress is actually thriving. This new Dubai, built on long-term tech capital, heavily regulated digital infrastructure, and uniquely scarce hard assets, is absorbing the shockwaves and continuing to grow.
Now we have to look at the reality on the ground neutrally. This isn't just a spreadsheet exercise. The threats are very real. There have been tragic civilian casualties, like the incident with intercepted drone debris in Al-Barsha. The region's digital infrastructure definitely showed some cracks, with a massive Amazon data center crash that completely paralyzed e-commerce for a bit. And maybe most critically, there are severe anxieties around the desalination plants, which supply over half of the UAE's drinking water. If that Strait of Hormuz stays closed for over 60 days, that 4.5% growth forecast, it's going to get slashed right in half.
So where is the safe harbor now?
For anyone trying to actually navigate this geopolitical storm, you can't just throw darts at a board anymore. Strict risk management is the only play. In real estate, it's all about irreplaceable scarcity. A limited villa on a golf course acts as an anchor, while a standard, cookie-cutter apartment might just blow away in the wind. You have to align with the government's massive 302 billion dirham infrastructure budget. You invest where the new metro lines and schools are physically going into the ground. And for businesses, digital redundancy is an absolute necessity right now. Offshore backup servers are the only way to survive regional data blackouts. Most importantly, stay entirely away from purely speculative, unregulated assets. We've got a city split in two. One side is shedding its speculative excess in a panic, and the other is pulling in global capital as a fortified safe haven. The data clearly shows us the mechanics at play, but the future is heavily tied to geopolitics completely out of the city's control. So I'll leave you with this to think about. As this conflict drags on, will Dubai's heavily engineered fortress continue to hold back the desert storm, or will its long history of economic miracles finally, permanently fade into a mirage? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the headlines.